If you have kids running around the park doing nothing, that's play. If you have them running back and forth on a soccer pitch, that's a game. So playful design is going to make the world more interesting, more playful, more fun, but not in a structured way. So an example of this is an experiment that was run, I think, 5-6 years ago, where they were trying to get people to take the stairs more instead of the escalator or the elevator. So what they did, what this design company did, they made it so that when you went up the stairs, it played notes, like on a keyboard, like on a piano. And so people would take the stairs because they would hear the music. Some people would move up and down the stairs, try to play a song, that kind of thing. So it's not a game, but it is playful. But it is interesting, it's worthwhile work, but it's not what we'll be talking about. Any questions? All right, so an example of gamification, which is also sort of connected to serious games as well, is something called Chore Wars. So this is, again, another older example of gamification. The idea behind Chore Wars is that, all right, I'll admit it, I'm a nerd. I played Dungeons and Dragons. I'm not going to be sorry about that. But if you've ever played a Tolkien game, Dungeons and Dragons, role-playing games, that kind of thing, this is essentially what the game is built around, except instead of going out and fighting a dragon, you have to do the dishes, clean your bathroom, take out the laundry, that kind of thing. When you do that, you get points, experience points. You also get gold that you can use to buy items, and then you can move on in the adventure. So essentially with Chore Wars, it's not a video game in the sense that you don't log into a video game and play it. Instead, you log into a website, you have a character, and that character can go on adventures. And the game master, usually a parent, is the person who sets up this adventure. And for the players, usually kids, what happens is that they have to do these things in the real world so that when they go play the game, they actually have the experience points and the weapons and so on to advance. So hold on to this idea because it's going to come back at us when we talk about exercise. All right, so gamification failures. Gamification, as we currently know it, really took off somewhere around 2009 and 2010. And so for about two years or so, you had a lot of researchers and consultants jump on this idea. And they liked it. It was very easy to sell. It sounded fun and interesting. However, it led to a lot of gamification failures. So two examples I'll talk about here. The first one is staff ranking at Microsoft, so Microsoft software company. What they essentially did is they gamified their HR person, their human resource person. I won't go into all the gory details, but essentially it meant that you ended up having to compete with your fellow coders to make sure you didn't end up at the end of the stack. And so they implemented it, and it was a complete disaster. People undercut each other. You wouldn't want to work with someone who was really good because then you would get them to move up the rank, and you wouldn't go up either. You had people, because there's also a peer review process, people actively hurting good coders so that their scores wouldn't go too high, and then they wouldn't end up at the top. So they ended it after about 2 or 3 years because it was such a disaster. Another example is all these iterations of reading programs that use games or points to try and get children to read more. So the study that looked at this from a gamification standpoint all the way back in 2003, noticed two things that happened. One is that when you introduced the games, kids started to try and game the system. So their reading habits changed, but not in a good way. What happened was that they started to read shorter, easier books to get more points. And okay, that's kind of bad, but not as bad as the next thing, which is that once the reading program was taken away, students who used to read for fun stopped reading. Their intrinsic levels of having fun reading actually went down because of this intervention, which is terrible. So what was the problem here? Why is this an issue? The major reason is that traditional gamification is focused entirely on points and badges and levels and that. It's very similar to If you've ever watched Portlandia, there's a skit that they do where there's these people, I guess they're business consultants, and they go into this craft shop, and they're like, this craft shop is boring and uninteresting. How can we make it interesting? We'll put a bird on it. You have a pillow that doesn't look really interesting? Put a bird on it. Yeah, it's quirky and fun. Well, okay, but that's not true. And the same thing happened here, except instead of putting a bird on it, you put points on it, assuming that it would make things better, and it doesn't. It's more complicated. So 80% of gamification projects fail, according to the Gartner Group, which is a business consulting group. And the traditional gamification issues that pop up, mainly based off this point issue, is either it's inherently exploitative. So Jesse Shell, who's a video game researcher down in Georgia, he talks about what he calls the game apocalypse, where if this works out, if this is as useful as the marketing consultants say, then we would end up in this dystopian future where every single marketing activity and objective is gamified. So you go walk into the grocery store, you get points for it. You watch a TV ad, you get points for it, and so on. Trying to push people towards these marketing objectives. The second issue is that, as I've already sort of talked about, there's this focus on extrinsic value, in gamification versus intrinsic value. So we're essentially giving people cookies to do the work. But that's not the point, though. The whole point of gamification was to make the activity intrinsically fun, something I really want to do. And I'm not just looking for the cookie, I'm looking for the point. And lastly, as I mentioned, unintended consequences. As you have people using these systems, they're going to try and game the system, and their behavior may be completely opposite to what we want them to do. And so all of these three issues make traditional gamification a possible problem. And so by 2015 or 16, you started to hear people say, is gamification dead? Is it not a very worthwhile enterprise, and so on? It's not, and we'll see how it actually goes through later, ways in which it can change. But the main reason why gamification is a problem or has failed in 2012, people identified it as it's a design. So if this was an information systems class or an information systems group, we can move right on to the next stuff. But for those of you not in the know, what do we mean when we talk about design? So I'm going to have to take a bit of a segue and talk a little bit about what an information system is and what analysis and design is. All right, so an information system is very different from the information technology that we think of. Most of the times we use the term interchangeably. However, they are completely different. This clicker, my laptop, phone, the lectern are all information technology. They are hardware and software. They are things in the world. However, for an information system to exist, we need three other things. We need to have the people who actually use this technology, the situation or the process or the procedures in which the technology is being used in, and lastly, the data that exists on this hardware or software. If we have all of these five things, we have an information system. We can design a system. We can choose the people who use it. We can tell them when to use it. We can put specific data onto a particular technology to make a system. And this is what keeps me in a job, because if it was just designing the hardware and software, that would be easy. But unfortunately, people exist and we need to worry about it. So it makes our lives hard as designers, but also it keeps me actually in a job. So just as an example to show you, think about Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. When it comes down to the hardware and software of those technologies, they're very similar, exceedingly similar. However, the types of people, where you use it, and the data that's on it is very different. And so those are very different information systems. Instagram is focused entirely, for the most part, on pictures. Twitter is dependent on rapid-fire communication. And Facebook is trying to be everything to everybody. But again, they all use the same internet technology. They all use the same servers and databases. Their software is very similar. But the data, procedures, and people are very different. And so if we design an information system, we need to think about these three things as well. All right, so what do I mean by design and analysis? Well, let's say I'm building an information system, I'm developing it. I have to do two things before I even sit down to write the code. The first thing I need to do is figure out the requirements. So the requirements are, I go to a user and ask, what do you want to use this for? What I usually call the magic box. I don't want you to tell me that I need to use a mobile phone, or I need to use a database, or I need to use the internet, or nothing. I want to be able to give information to workers on the plant floor instantly. And that could be an app I put on people's phones, it could be a tablet, it could be a screen on the plant floor, it could be me yelling from the top. Any of that is going to get the job done. And all I want to do is get the job done. Now, once I have those requirements, I then design. Design is where I figure out, okay, what technology do I need? How is it going to be stitched together? Where am I going to buy it? Do I need to rent it to build it? I haven't coded yet. I've just tried to figure out what in the world I have to build. Then I start building. So what should happen is that if I do this part right, if I get the requirements correctly and I get the design correct, then once I start building and testing and maintaining the system, it's exactly what you need. And so it sounds pretty simple, right? And very simple to explain it, but when to actually implement it, it does get different. So anytime anybody talks about system analysis and design and it shows common sense, there's a reason why. It gives us the ability to understand the problem with information analysis and design. Problem is communication. Too much communication. Short, let's say for the sake of argument, I talk to a customer or a user, and they explain that this is what they want. They want to swing on a tree, and it's not quite just one thing I sit on, it's multiple things around me, okay? So then the project leader who listens to this goes, well, I'm just going to create a swing that's kind of connected at the end of the tree, and it doesn't swing that well, but it gets the job done. The analyst who designs it says, well, I'll assume that the tree doesn't really exist in this point, and then support it with these things that don't exist in the real world, and it will work out for me. The programmer who has to code it looks at this analysis and goes, that's not going to work. But they want a rope and they wanted some planks, so I'll just kind of put it together. This is how the salesperson or business consultant said it was going to work. You got a swing, it's a wonderful day, you got a comfy chair, it's amazing. This is how the project was documented. This is what was actually installed. Here's your rope, you're good to go. This is how it was built, as if it was a roller coaster. Here's how it's supported. There's the sky, there's the ground and the trunk. The rest is up to you. And then lastly, this is what the customer needs. Just a tire swing. That's what they wanted. They didn't know what they wanted it. They couldn't tell us that they wanted it. It's our job as an analyst and designers to figure this out so that we do create it. And a well-designed system will look like this. And the customer will go, wow, it's not exactly what I asked for, but it's exactly what I need. All right. So then if that's the case, if it becomes difficult to do analysis and design, and most of the gamification failures that exist are because of design failures, what do? Gamification designers need help. They need tools, they need processes, step-by-step processes that tell them what to do so they can keep all this stuff in their heads, and they can actually implement it in their technology when they design. And so we create these things called gamification design framework, which are really just a step-by-step how-to guide to start figuring out how gamification is going to exist for your particular problem. Usually, the person who is trying to design this is someone who has no coding experience whatsoever. They don't know C++ or COBOL versus whatever. So then they need to be able to communicate this design, though, to the person who's actually built it. So as health science professionals, you might want to build an app that somehow encourages running or whatever else, but you may not know how to code, and if you don't, you'll need to tell this to somebody else. So then how do I communicate this in a way that they understand it, that they get what's going on, and that they build the thing that I So most of these gamification design frameworks that exist are focused on the logic of games. So they help you to figure out, okay, I've never built a game in my life. What are the components I need to figure out to create or design a complete game? Which is good. It's a great start. However, most of them miss the context and the user characteristics of the people playing the game. Remember, I talked about people and procedures and data. For the most part, they focus on the hardware and software, the artifacts, technology. This is how you're going to design the game, the app, and not thinking about the characteristics and the content. So why would this be a problem? Well, I'm going to give you a non-video game example, but let's say I'm trying to encourage people to exercise more, and so what I'm going to do is build a game. And using the logic of games, I need to figure out what the items are. So what are the mechanics in the game? What are the rules of the game? And what are the players' constraints? What do they have? What are their actions? So then I think about it and I go, okay, I want people to move around a lot. So I'm going to create 2 teams, and they are on this thing we call a court. And at the end of each court are these baskets. Okay, you told me the mechanics. Well, how does it work? Well, the rules are that you take this ball as a player, you bounce it up and down, you move from one end of the court to the opposing end, and you put it into the basket. If you're close, you get 2 points. If you're far away, you get 2. And now I've described the logic of basketball. That's good, and there we're done. We're finished, right? I don't need to worry about it. But what if I start to implement it, and I'm saying, okay, I've got this amazing game called basketball, and what I want to do is get my kids in the driveway to play. Great. So we're going to have to create a court. There's going to have to be 2 ends on the court. And when we were thinking about the game originally, we thought it would be played by professionals, so it's yay tall, instead of for 6-year-olds who are this tall. And so it's going to work out, right? No, the kids will never get a basket, and we only use it in the driveway. So then we're going to have to somehow connect 2 driveways together, and they're going to have to play across the street. Not good. Okay, so then what about the context? The context is I only have a driveway, and the characteristics are that the kids are this tall. So I need to bring down the hoop and invent rules for half-court basketball. And it's easy for us to do that in this example because all I have to do is set it up. But remember, the rules and the mechanics for gamification exist in the application. They exist on the phone or the app. You can't just go, I'm just going to open it up and start changing the code so it fits my characteristics. You can't do that. So I end up with this application that in theory should work in my context for my users, but doesn't. And we end up with the reading game or stat ranking at Microsoft. It's a failure. So what we need to do is we need to create a gamification design framework, which is what we call socio-technical, which is a fancy term for saying we worry about people. The characteristics, why they're playing, what they're thinking. All right, so then from there, we started to think of a study that we could do to help us create this design framework. And so we thought of a type of research that is called action design research. So what is action design research? The combination of action and design research. Okay, fine. But what do those words mean? What is action research? Action research is a theoretically grounded intervention in a real-life problem. So I, as a researcher, go into a particular company or an organization, and they have an actual problem they need to solve. So let's say their information system development is in shambles. Now, I, as a researcher, use my theory and I study them to figure out what's going on. And at the end of my study, I may have suggestions for them to help them with their problem. My dad was a professor, he's retired now, needed a lot of action research in rural sociology. So he would go to farms and try to help them with better crop rotation and delivering this information to people in third world countries, rural areas, and so on. That's action research. It's more exciting than it sounds. You're not in the cake flying around or anything. It's just you getting into a problem and trying to solve it. Design science or design research, on the other hand, is where it's also research. The research is problem focused. I find a particular problem and I try to solve it. But here I need to build something to solve the problem. I need to build an artifact. Usually in information systems, it means an application or hardware or something. And the whole point of it is that it supports focus. So I go into a I look at a problem, I look at an issue, and I say, this isn't my area. It's not business, or maybe it is business, but not information systems. But I need to figure out what your problem is, and I'm here to help you solve it. However, the way in which design research is set up, it means that I may not actually solve your problem. Instead, your problem has given me inspiration to take a look at a particular area. So then what I can do is do case studies and experiments are valid in this case. So let's say, for the sake of argument, here's an example. I was just talking to a research collaborator of mine yesterday, and she was thinking about how can we, the issue of fake news and disinformation on social media, how can we find a way to stop it from happening? Or how can we design an information system or a social media application that would mitigate the spread of disinformation? So then as design science, what we could do is build an application like a sort of Facebook, prototype Facebook. We could put it in front of 2 or 3 people or 5 people, and we can call it a day. We don't actually have to put it into the real world. We don't have to knock on Facebook's door and say, you got to change this. It's just, we were inspired by a real problem. We built something that should solve that problem. We put it in front of people to validate it, and they said yes. So then, in this case, we have the environment, which provides relevance to the research. And then you have your knowledge base, like your theories, your frameworks, formalism, which are then used within the research to build something. That's the key. You always have to build something in design research. And then it becomes assessed or justified in some way, and you refine it. So you go through what we call iterative design, where you build something, you justify, you evaluate it. People say this worked well, but this didn't. You change it again. You then send it back to people to evaluate and so on. And so then we put together these 2 ideas of action research and design research, and what we get is, first, we're trying to design a real-world information product and put it into a real situation. So we're doing the action part by actually changing a set of people or an organization or something else. But we're doing the design part because we're building something, not just studying. We're building something to solve a problem. You investigate the results. You then iterate the design. As I said, you go back to your user group. You get them to take a look at the system. They say this worked, this didn't. You then change it, send it back, and again. And the project ends when your solution, when your artifact actually becomes a solution, or you run out of money. And then, so for our project, what we wanted to do, me and my project in New Zealand, what we wanted to do was look at Exergames as our real-world problem. All right, so what's our motivation for Exergame research? This is stuff that probably all of you know way better than me. We know that children, adults, adolescents, everybody are not getting enough physical activity. And there is also a decrease in physical activity in children when they become adolescents. So several culprits have been named. Increased screen time, so TV, phones, video games. Lack of physical education in schools, and also the lack of physical play. So that running around with the kids is becoming less popular. So then, also adolescents and adults find physical activity to be cumbersome because we've designed our lives, and that word is design, in a way in which physical play is no longer something we can do. It's not something that is, which results in the sportification of it, the literature of fitness. So the idea being that now a large majority of people think of fitness as a way to get ready for a competition. Oh, why are you running? I'm training for a marathon. Why are you bodybuilding? Oh, I'm getting strong for a football game, whatever else. Not the intrinsic interest in just being fit. It's fit for a sports purpose. And if I'm not a competitive person or I never got into sports, then fitness is no longer something to do. So physical play is very different from sports. As I said before, we have this playful design, we have games, we have sports, we have physical play. It's spontaneous, it's fun, it's creative, it's unstructured. And there's been many suggestions that physical play needs to come back. It needs to be a part of our, at least children's education, and children's day-to-day activities. And what we want to do is create motivation beyond just these extrinsic benefits that exist in fitness, so that it becomes something that I inherently want to do. I want to actually go out there and be at fun of it. And so McGonigal in 2011, Jane McGonigal is a researcher from MIT, and her big thing is that video games will save us all. She believes that video games are these motivation engines that if you take a look at people playing video games, they're playing it for no real reason. I mean, I spent about 3 hours yesterday playing a video game. I got nothing out of it except the fact that I was having fun playing. So then McGonigal's idea is, okay, you got people putting in hours and hours, time and effort playing these video games. Is there a way in which we can take that energy, take that time and interest, and make it so that it changes our real life? So her major book is called Reality is Broken, basically based off of the idea that when people talk about video games that aren't working, they say, oh, the game is broken. It's unbalanced. And her idea is that we've designed life such that it's unbalanced. And what we need to do is use video game design ideas to make our life. So coming out of something like that is this idea of Exergames. With Exergames, what you have are video games that have some sort of form of exercise attached to it. And these can look very different. So Pokemon Go, which was popular about a year or two ago, is an example of an Exergame. Different type of Exergame in that the whole gameplay of it is not based off of an exercise, but it does involve you having to walk around and find Pokemon. So it's very explorative. Actually, I'm making the assumption everybody knows what Pokemon Go is. How many people know what Pokemon is? All right, there we go. But you don't know what Fortnite is. But anyway, this is exceedingly popular at a time, and people still play it. I know several people who still try to collect Pokemon around town. There's also another one called Dance Dance Revolution. It's an older game, but again, Dance Dance Revolution is all about you moving and dancing to music, and the main form of gameplay is, again, moving around. Also, Wii Sports is an example of a video game which now tries to take sport and put it in the video game world, but also make it active. So Wii Tennis, where you have a remote, very similar to this, and you pretend that you're on a tennis court playing tennis. And on the screen, it looks like also, the trend is to move towards VR, or virtual reality, and AR, or augmented. Augmented reality is Pokemon Go. I use my phone in the real world, and with my phone, I can augment that there are Pikachus and Magikarps and other Pokemon in the world. While VR is Oculus Rift and Vive and other virtual reality goggles that you put on, and the real world is just taken out. Not even a part of you. You're in another world. So the similarities in a lot of these Exergames is that, yes, exercise is a big part of it, but also some sort of screen is being used at the same time as you exercise or as you move around. Even with Pokemon Go, you're looking at your phone as you move around. With Dance Dance Revolution, you're looking at Wii Sports, you're looking at a screen in front of you while you have a sensor in front of you that is sending information to a game console. But the screen is still there. And in VR, if I have virtual reality goggles, then the screen is the goggles right in front. Also, there's synchronous with game exercise. So I play the game while I exercise. I'm moving around while the game is there. So just some examples. This isn't Dance Dance Revolution, it's another dance game. Not which one. And so here, what ends up happening, you look at the screen, and you have these avatars moving around, and you have different dance moves that you can do, and you get points for them. And you are standing in the real world here in front of your TV, copying the dance. So the only way you can play the game is by moving around, is by actually physically copying these dances. It's a lot of fun. Also, from the VR and AR perspective, what virtual reality may look like. Here's one example. I think that looks like an Oculus Rift, and they're on a stationary bike, and this is what the person is seeing. They're seeing it as they're on an actual road, biking down the road. So you put them into this alternate world where they feel that they're actually moving through it, and the VR goggles gives them a feel. While this is not Pokemon Go, but I believe it might. Oh yeah, it's Pokemon Go. There's also another game called Kafui. But these are people in Times Square, it looks like, looking at their phone, moving around, trying to find Pokemon area. So this is more augmented reality. So there are current issues with this design. The first being that there is some initial interest in Exergames, but then it quickly tapers off. So Pod All in 2007, we're looking at increasing physical activity among 10 to 12-year-old boys and girls. And they introduced one of these dance games to them. And very quickly, they were really interested in it, and then after a week, the interest just died. Not interested. Another issue that Carrie 2015 brought up is that most of these games provide non-strenuous activities. Things like sort of rhythmically moving to music. Can't really call it dancing because it's not that. But and you have people just walking around with Pokemon Go. You don't have to run from one end of the field to another to play Pokemon Go. You can just easily stroll around the park finding. So there's no real strenuous exercise that's happening. And so this leads to the wicked problem I'm looking for. I'm looking, how do we make these games interesting and encourage strenuous activity at the same time? And this is very hard to do with current technology. Even if you say, well, okay, we're going to, all the examples actually that I gave have their problems. With the dance application, you are constrained. You can't move outside of the sensor. Very similar to this camera. If I move too far away or too close, then it can't read me, and I end up messing up. So I'm confined to a box like this, where I have to move. The other issue is that you've probably heard, and now there's research on it, people who have hurt themselves or others playing Pokemon Go. Walking into a building, playing while driving. I was afraid that mortality rate in Japan would go up 30% because of Pokemon Go when it first came out. And so it also can be very dangerous to use AR, especially VR, in a non-confined space. So maybe video game design can help us. If we think about video game design, maybe we can start to build these Exergames in a way that we can make them interesting and encourage strenuous. Right, so then when thinking about this Exergame prototype and going back to video game design, there's this work that I've done with my friend in New Zealand, Paul Ralph, and we talked about design, like what are the components that make up a video game? And can we play around with those components so that we build a different type of Exergame? So I'm not going to go into all of the details of the theory, but the main thing to think about is that video game, and in our case maybe the gamification, is split into three major things. The artifact, the information technology, the hardware, the software, the players who play it, and together they create the experience. So Jesse Schell talked about this when talking about games. He says, okay, if I were talking about a game of chess, what am I talking about? Am I talking about the chessboard just sitting there? It's not a game of chess. It's a bunch of pieces and a board, that's it. And the player themselves, a chess player who isn't playing chess, isn't really a chess player. It happens here in the experience. when you get the two together, they play the game of chess. So chess isn't a bunch of rules. It isn't a bunch of items. It isn't a person who knows how to play. It's when you put all that together and you get this emergent experience. That's what chess is. So what's happening with a lot of these Exergames is that the experience of exercise is where they're putting it. They're saying, well, we have all these different game mechanics. You've got a list of moves and the screen and sensor and so on, and you have this person playing, and then together they create this experience of exercise. But what if you make exercise a mechanic? What if it's just like moving a controller, or dealing with your inventory in a role-playing game, or something like that? It's just a thing you kind of have to do, but the game itself, the experience of the game itself, is completely different. So what would that look like? There's a Exergame which comes very close to what we're looking at, called Run Zombie. And it's an app that you put on your phone, and what you do is you play it, and a story mission shows up. You are this survivor in this zombie apocalypse, and you need to run from one failing outpost to another to supply goods, to save people, and so on. Some post-apocalyptic night. But as you play through these seasons and you have a mission, as you're playing through it, you're just running because you have your earphones on, you've got your cell phone, and you're just running. And then there'll be a sound of zombies. And based on the accelerometer of your phone, if you're not running fast enough, you get caught by the zombies, and the game is over. But if you want to get through the mission, you have to run fast. And there's rest points and stories and so on along the way. So really, you running isn't the gameplay. You are really just going through the mission story, and you running is essentially you just pressing a button as you want to advance the story. It's not like, it's kind of similar to Pokemon Go, but it's definitely not like Wii Sports or Dance Revolution, anything else, where the gameplay is about you moving. This is just a mechanic that we use to move forward. And I can keep on adding the real meat of the gameplay, which is me just moving through the story. And so this might sound kind of odd as a video game the video game gameplay is you just moving through the story, but this is exceedingly similar to an actual type of video game that exists out there, called visual novels. Essentially what they are is you have a picture, they're usually anime for some reason, and it's really popular in Japan. And then what you end up with is just a story that you read, and if you want to move forward, you just press a button and it tells you more. And you might have some decision points where you have to decide what to say or where to go or in which order to talk to people. But really, it's just you moving through the story. The difference between this and this is that in here, instead of pressing a button, I run. That's it. The mechanic. So we took this idea and thought, okay, that's great. And what you end up doing is you just start having to add more and more stories to Zombies Run, just as you would to Doki Doki Literature Club. They also have their names, visual novels. But anyway, at that point, all I need to do is just keep on adding more story elements. But what if I wanted to create another type of game, something that would be that is even more engaging? Because the problem with visual novels is that they aren't. They're just you pressing a button. What if I actually wanted to do something in the game? And so this idea came out, the idea that came out of this work in 2017, where what we wanted to do was take exercise and use it as a mechanic in an existing video game. So I'll ask, I don't know what the answer would be. How many of you heard of Skyrim before? Okay, so Skyrim is a very popular video game. It's old now, like maybe about years old, something like that, so 5, 6 years old. And we'll go into a little bit about what the game is like, but one big part of it and why people still play it now is that it has a large mod community. So a mod community are people who will change and modify the game to make it better. So as I said, the game came out maybe 6 years ago. If you take all the mods now and you play Skyrim, you'll think it's a mod. It looks beautiful. And it's because people put more work into it over the years. And these are just normal people, not developers. They're not asking to get paid or anything. It's completely free. They just do it on their own because they love the game so much. And so what we did is we built a mod for Skyrim. But what the mod did is it didn't change any graphics, didn't add any more monsters or anything like that. Instead, it made it so that you could translate your exercise activity into the game. So how does that work? Well, basically, if you're playing Skyrim on a screen, it looks like this. So this is the magic user. He's using Fireball, I think. This is the sword. He's fighting a dragon. Here's his health and magic. And so behind all of the characters are all these statistics. What's their health, their magicka, their stamina, and all these different abilities. The higher the points, the better you can do it. So, for instance, here, I took it out. I guess stamina would be one where if you walk around in the world, and so this is like the 5th iteration of the game, but in the previous one, you just simply walking around in the world gave you abilities in walking. You use it, right? And so same here, if you start swinging a sword around, you will get points in one hand. If you have a two-handed sword, you get points in two hands, and so on. So then that's really what is behind every character. Every action, everything they do, every interaction is based off of these numbers. So what we did is we used a commercial application, fitness tracker app, and we translated by saying, okay, if you do these things like dynamic stretching and squats, and straight leg deadlifts, and so on, you will get a certain number of points. So just tell us what. Keep your track, go to this website, put in your information, download the mod, and it will connect this information to the stats I just showed you before. So in the end, if you log in, it'll say you're 86% to your next level, you need to approximately 326 exercise points to level up. So you exercise outside of the game, and you've used that to be able to level up in the game. And when you do, you get these new stats, which are based off of the types of exercises that you do. So if you did more strength exercises, you get more health. If you did more cardio, you get stamina, and I think it was stretching or something like that. So what this does is, again, turns exercise into a mechanic. Some of the, I would say, unintended consequences, the possible consequences that could occur is that if you're mainly a magic user, then it would encourage you to stretch more. If you are a physical, like a fighter character, you would end up doing more, a little bit more cardio and a lot more weight. And this is completely arbitrary, right? We created it ourselves. If you wanted to change your behaviors or encourage certain behaviors, you could change how this translation. But this is basically how the connection is here. So what we've done is we've separated out exercise from the game itself, but they're still connected. So now you can run, lift weights, swim, you can do whatever you want. You're completely unconstrained, but you're still connected to the game. Exercise becomes the mechanic, not the game. And you get people to continue to exercise as addition to them playing. So that was our building of, we built it, we tested out, it worked technically, but remember I said, when it comes to information systems, the hardware and software is the easy part, we need to worry about the people data. And that's kind of where we're stuck right now. So our first study that we'd like to do is basically understand Exergames use and design, and analyze how the current Exergames work, and how our prototype may lead to changes in behavior. So what we would do is we test the prototype with participants here. We give it to them, give them a copy of Skyrim if they don't have it already. The mod is free, they can download it, it's available. And the tracker app we would have to create, because the commercial one is not available right now. And then we would build all of this and then iteratively design it. So as we built it, we we get people to use it, and they tell us, oh, it was fun, but I didn't use it anymore, or we wish it had this feature or that feature, and we make changes, and then we put it out again to the users, and then they use it again, and they tell us how to be designed and so on. Also, the other thing we need to figure out is our database exercises, as well as translation between the real world and the game world. What does it mean to do 45 minutes of cardio in the real world as translation to practice? And what will, not only what should really be the connection, but what will be the connection that encourages people to go back every day to exercise? And of course, creating new apps. In study 2, what we're thinking of doing is extending the prototype by using what we call socio-technical design. So we gather new requirements. In the first study, we're assuming that the system is pretty much done. We're going to iteratively design it, but it's still pretty much done. Here, we're thinking, well, are there certain requirements that people actually want that we didn't think on our own? When we designed the prototype, we didn't go out there and do requirements. We just built what we wanted. So maybe there is a better way to build it. We don't know. We haven't done the work yet. And then gather those new requirements. We'd again evaluate the new study, very similar, or new prototype, very similar to what we did in study 1. And then we develop what we call a conceptual modeling language. That's what in information systems we call it. The relationship between concepts that are part of the socio-technical system. In short, the things I need to talk about to get the right requirements for a particular technology. And it makes the communication job easier and more constrained. So I had a friend who worked in the medical industry, and as a systems designer, and he talked to a doctor, and the doctor said, "We need an app." For what? Well, we need an app. And this happens to us so many times. People are like, well, we need a mobile app because that's what everybody has, but there's no requirement. What do you want me to do? I can't just build something. And strangely enough, most medical industry people think we're wizards, that we can just build it. We need to know why we're building it and for what purpose. And so if you're building a system, you need to know what those concepts are so that you can gather the requirements and build it. And a conceptual modeling language gives you those requirements. So things like, what are the relationships between game elements and fitness? Or are there particular elements of gamification of exercise that I need to figure out first before I figure out the rest? So just to give you an idea of what that might look like, this is what a conceptual model looks like for a database. Database is a information system that holds a bunch of data. And I know I have subjects, I have data, and I have relationships between these entities. And that's all I need to know. If I can gather all that information about what things do you care about, what characteristics of things you care about, and how are they related to each other, I could build a database for you in about 3 or 4 hours. But this could take a day. Because I need to get this requirement. And so we want to build something similar for gamification so that it guides the requirement gathering process. So you're not spending weeks trying to build something for somebody and you're just completely missing it. In the third study, what we'll do is we'll say, okay, we've come up with all of these tools to help us build Exergames. What we're going to do is start from scratch. We're going to have a completely different game, same basic generalized design, and see what we can do with it. So will this process be generalized enough that we can have to use a similar game, like a game similar to Skyrim, or a completely different game? Maybe we jump on that Fortnite bandwagon and we create a Fortnite. Well, that'd be hard to do, but something similar for a game like that. And what are the constraints of this new Exergame design? Are there certain games where this won't work? Are there certain people where this won't work? And then that would be the end of the proposed study. 3 basically feeding into each other, and at the end, we have a generalized idea of how to build these systems. All right, so in conclusion, gamification is used to encourage a wide variety of behavior, but they're mainly poorly designed. This is because they focus too much on the technical rather than on the socio-technical. We are proposing a socio-technical design framework, which takes into account people and the constraints in which they are using the system. And so we're going to do an active design research based on Exergames to be able to develop this framework, and separate the application from the game, separate the exercise from the game, and develop a generalized way of building these games so that we put it out in the wild, we publish it, and people could take our process and build as many different types of these games. All right. So, my talk. Key question. Yes. So the way it's a fitness tracking app, which has the basic accelerometer information, but also self-reported data. So you could say, this is my workout, and then you put that into the app. And so maybe one other one would be a feature that is more. So we don't know. But in the one that we currently have, it's just you self-reporting your workout. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Right. We wouldn't be able to do that. But like if you had a Fitbit that had that information, it would be able to identify activity. You could also run analytics on it to see is this not normal. You'd be able to identify that on Tuesday in the afternoon, I have a lot of physical activity. Why is it? Well, my kids, I can't find food for my kids, so then I take care of the kids on that day, and I'm going to it will be able to keep track of that and identify that. So if things like overuse, what we could do is tie your physical self, to your digital avatar, and then make it so that if you do like if it's running or if it's some other thing, that it may actually hurt you if you do too much. So yeah, we're trying to gather these requirements to be able to see what some of the unintended consequences be, because like me and my colleagues just not. Yeah.
Thinking kind of along the lines of this, kind of probably thinking, have you thought of a framework for a fitness tracker, kind of in regards to?
Yeah, it's something that we have thought about. The issue would be being able to gather access to that. So depending on how Fitbit's set up, if they have their own proprietary software, then that could work. We would just take the data that's presented to you on the website, and we can use a web crawler to pull that data, and then turn it into something that we send to our mod, which would translate it and say, okay, this is what they do. So we would be kind of at the mercy of whatever Fitbit is used to be able to say this, and then pull that data. Yeah.
That's one that was really interesting. Great. I think it's like pretty cool how you're taking games like Skyrim, the game you actually have time to play rather than like a very almost basic thing.
Right.
Because that would be like getting difficult. That's like more reinforcing, right?
Yeah.
My question would be though is like how do you keep these games going on?
Right. So this goes back to the people that we're talking about, right? Because the assumption we made when we built this was that these are gamers who like to play, but they also are willing or interested in being at least somewhat fit, right? So what this does is it kills two birds with one stone. On the other hand, if you are somebody who's never, because it's voluntary, right? You have to download the mod. And so I could play Skyrim without the mod, or I could say, well, I'm going to use this mod instead, and it's, well, I go to the gym anyway, I might as well, right? That's the person who is most likely to use it. On the other hand, if you make it so that you can level up slightly faster, somewhere between a microtransaction and you actually playing the game, then that might make it more worthwhile. And for those of you who don't know the term microtransaction, there are some games that are designed, you either give them your time or your money. And you have to give them a lot of time or some of your money. So I may have to level up in a game, I may have to put in 20, 30, 40 hours to do it, or I pay $5. Or I exercise for 10 hours. That's the other part, right? That is something that we're hoping we can kind of create with these mods, is say, there's another way you can do that. You don't have to give me money, and you don't have to sit there for 30 hours. Instead, you can go to the gym, come back, and you level up. Yeah. Right. So the idea is that there's already internal mechanics in the game. That makes sense. So then what you're trying to do is connect back your love of playing Skyrim to something like it. So these points are, in a way, you can see them as being intrinsic, but the way in which we've designed it is we're still focused on you getting it within the game itself. So you don't know if you have gotten the points that you need until you log in. So if you, let's say, if I was really focusing on just trying to use the points to encourage you, I would create an app where every time you do a certain exercise, you're 50% close to winning or close to getting a level. It's instead supposed to be, what you're trying to do is bring in what we call the emotions or aesthetics from a game into exercise. So there's this theory of video games where you have the mechanics of the game, the dynamics of the game, and what we call the aesthetics of the game. And those are the things that keep you there. So I play a game and I feel like I'm in another world, or I feel like I'm connected to people, or I feel that I'm competing against somebody, or I feel that I am achieving something. And so the idea is that for something like Skyrim, achievement is there, but it's mainly about the narrative and the make-believe. So then, knowing that lifting weights or running or stretching or other activities are going to give me magic points or health points, I'm bringing in that fantasy into my exercise. Or at least that's what we hope, right? And then maybe, let's say we run it, the app doesn't do that, we can change it. So that the app is not just giving feedback, but it's not giving point feedback, it's giving fantasy. So, wow, like let's say you've done a lot of weight, and we say, you might get a notification saying you've done enough weight that you could do this particular task in this town in Skyrim. Again, we don't want to move on the point thing, we want to move on other aesthetics which make it work. I found another question. Okay. Oh yeah. Yeah.
So I'm thinking it so like rather than like accomplishment like that's when things get repeated. Maybe I'll get it if I keep trying.
Right. And so that is one, like a random factor or something like that. So like essentially exercise loot boxes, which would be odd, but I can see it. And you could have a random element within it. So then the way in which you design it would be that you would have, so the best mechanics are ones that have a certainty, that are low variability, but high uncertainty. So I know I'm going to get either 15 or 20 points, but I don't know which I'm going to get. Versus, I know I'll get between 1 and 100. People tend to not like that. And with like a huge random effect. Even if you say, for the most part, you're going to fall between 90 and 99, they still don't like the fact that I get 1. Right? But if I say it's 15 to 20 and it is completely random, it can fall somewhere in between there, people tend to like that. Because they'll go, okay, I might get the low end, but it's not that low. But I might get the high. So then maybe adding in an extra boost or something along with the current, so you know you're going to get 100 plus random factor between 20. Then that becomes your little loot box of randomness. And you could be told, oh wow, I got 50 this time. So these are the things that we want to do in the first step because we haven't done the work. We haven't done the requirements gathering. We haven't done the iterative design to really get at those types of things. All right. Well, thank you very much.
All right, thank you, everybody. We'll see you in November 16th, I think. November 9th. Nope. 9th or the 16th to be announced. That was great.
Thanks.
I don't know how to end this. Oh. Well, there was one person on. Oh, that's I think maybe. I don't know. So you know how to end it?
Oh, thank you very much.
You just